Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming to today's event. It's so good to see such an amazing mix of healthcare, media and communications today. So thank you all so much for coming. And thank you to our partners in crime, the Pharma Letter, who helped us put this on. So very grateful for their help and support with that. So this is a really timely discussion that we're having today because in such a short amount of time, probably about 2 or 3 years, we've gone from AI-generated healthcare information being seen as theoretical and sort of stargazing to actually something that millions of patients are accessing LLMs every day for their healthcare information. And patients, we know, are increasingly going to LLMs over, for example, visiting their GP, or they're going to LLMs instead of visiting patient advocacy websites and things like that. So obviously the opportunities are absolutely massive with AI-generated healthcare information, faster, more accessible, sometimes easier to understand information. But of course, important questions are being raised. Questions around misinformation, questions around accessibility, accountability, and of course, questions around trust. So today's panel, and it's absolutely fabulous that we've got such a fantastic lineup today, so thank you to the panelists for joining us. The big question we're asking today is, in a world of AI-generated healthcare information, how do we protect the truth? So, of course, we'll be taking questions from all of you in the audience. There'll be Guy from the Pharma Letter with a roving mic, and also we'll be taking questions from online. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Pete Meikle, who's our Head of News. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you, Mark, and hello, everyone. It's so great to see so many of you for what is going to be a really interesting discussion today. Let me introduce the great panel. We have Sophie Randall here, who is the Director of the Patient Information Forum. The independent voice of quality health information is what you call yourself on the website. Yep. Excellent. Next to her, we have Tom Whipple, science writer and special correspondent for The Times, and also BBC science presenter as well on the side.
On the radio, yes.
On the radio.
Not that glamorous.
Next to Tom, we have our very own Chloe Particus, who is a director of our digital unit and actually works with many of the world's biggest healthcare companies. And next to her we have Steve Nowotny, who is editor of Full Facts, which is the UK's leading fact-checking charity. Okay, now, can't wait to get stuck in, but before we do, I'm going to just invite up Guy Martin, editor of the Pharma Letter, and he's going to start by giving us the findings of a really interesting online poll you ran about this topic very recently. Guy.
Okay, thank you, Pete, and thank you to the wider Fleischmann team for organising this timely and important event to discuss what is probably the most pressing topic in the dissemination of healthcare information today. And thank you also to the panellists for giving their time and expertise in contributing to the discussion. So, as mentioned, I'm the editor of the Pharma Letter, a publication providing pharmaceutical industry news and analysis. And you should see a QR code, I think, next door, or a link somewhere if you want to take a look at the site. All my colleagues, Mo and Angus, are around somewhere, so if you want to speak to them. So, as mentioned, we ran a poll on the site to give us some insights from our readers on this topic ahead of today's event. So, in response to our first question, how do you think the increasing use of large language models, LLMs, to provide health information will affect patient outcomes? The most common response, with 50% of votes, was that they will improve outcomes overall. 47% said it will depend how LLMs are used, and 3% said they'd worsen outcomes overall. On the second question, how comfortable would you be with patients using LLMs as a first source of health information? A third of people would be somewhat comfortable, 20% would be very uncomfortable, and the remainder were evenly split between very comfortable, somewhat uncomfortable, and depends on the context. So overall, a mix of optimism, caution, and a high degree of concern about the impact of LLMs. So on that note, I'll hand back over to what I'm sure will be a rich and insightful discussion, and say thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Guy. Optimism and caution in kind of same measure. I mean, that is the tightrope we're walking here. So I'm going to kick off with quite a broad brush question to to all of you here. And it's simply this: what part of the AI and health debate worries and excites you right now? I'll start with you, Sophie.
Okay, so I'm going to start with excited first. So I think the thing that is exciting is the ability to quickly get to people's answers to their questions in a very way. Don't know what's going on there. And in a very accessible way. So, it can speak the answer, it can translate the answer, it can do it in language that people can understand in their everyday life, which is not always common in health information. What worries us is that the models have been launched in a kind of arms race of, let's get to market first, let's dominate. And actually, they're not that accurate. So in terms of the UK context, they'll draw a lot from US sources. They can't localize.
Right.
They'll draw, if we're looking at Google's algorithm, they'll put as much emphasis on experiential content as evidence-based content. And what you're getting is a mishmash of answers that's resulting in a lot of inaccuracy.
Okay. Tom, what about you? Worry, excitement, a mixture?
Last week I spoke to one of the guys at Microsoft Health, AI Health, and they are looking to make, with sort of typical sort of Silicon Valley ambition, a medical superintelligence. And they're talking about, they've noticed that a large proportion of the searches on the LLMs are for health queries. They're trying to make one that is, is sort of like an exclave of that just looks at reputable sources, that has access to your personal health records that you've given it and that stay there, and can then give you personalised results from your health records and from what they claim to be reputable sources, that will, I would imagine, if it works, be highly accurate and no more than your GP, because it knows the entirety of medical information. What worries me is that, this is an LLM. LLMs hallucinate, and this isn't a trite point. There would be so much money in solving the hallucination problem, and no one has done it. So I see no reason, I haven't used this thing, I see no reason to believe that this thing that is within this walled garden they've got is going to be fundamentally any different, because they cannot stop these things from making stuff up. So, and if they solve it there, then they'll have solved it for the whole thing as well, which will be fascinating.
They can't stop these things from making things up. Does that worry you, Chloe? Or again, where are you seeing the green shoots and the positivity?
Yeah, so I think it definitely reflects some of the worries we have, but we're doing so much work around working with our clients to counteract that misinformation, and we'll touch on a bit of that later. But also definitely from the excitement side, we all kind of, on our side, go into healthcare comms because we want to help patients and help doctors be able to do their jobs, quicker and help more patients. So that side of it is definitely very exciting for us and helping to drive us as we do work to counteract the worries.
Right, okay, so a positive spin there. What about you, Steve? Where do you sit in general?
So I think I might try and cheat and actually give an answer which is both worrying and exciting. I think for me, the thing which is worrying and also a bit exciting is how relatively early in the process we still are. So I think obviously we're sitting here and we're talking about huge changes that have taken place in the last couple of years, but actually if you look at the number of people using chatbots, many people are using chatbots, many people are not yet and may start to. Equally, if you look at the way that tools have come on in the last year or two, that is going to continue. So I think, everything we talk about today could well be magnified in the next 2 or 3 years. And if we sit here in, May 2029, what will the conversation be? I don't think we know yet, and that is both worrying but also exciting.
Really interesting from all of you there. And by the way, as Mark said, we are really keen to get your questions from the floor. I'll be turning to you a bit later. And to you guys online, there's lots of you, would love to get your questions. Remember, when you type them in, can you put your name and who you represent when you send the questions in, and Mark will read a few of those out as we go on. Turning back to the panel, I want to turn to you specifically, Tom, and talk about the media, and as a science writer, how the media story around AI in healthcare has maybe changed over the last couple of years. What's your take as an insider?
Well, we start with new technologies being this sort of mysterious and exciting thing, and then they become banal. So, we saw it. eBay is a good example. We would run stories about, it feels ridiculous to think this is even a story, but 20 years ago or 15 years ago, it would be school kids have put their school on eBay, and then we do this, and it'd be this sort of this strange thing that existed in this place that our readers didn't know about. And AI has gone through this a lot faster, and it's now something our readers very much know about, and we're all using all the time. And our AI stories have changed accordingly from being about this thing doing strange and mysterious things to about this thing that's just in our life. But it is still doing strange and mysterious things. And obviously this is just a very small part of AI. I mean, just today, Isomorphic Labs got a massive multi-billion-pound injection for AI drug discovery. So there's so much going on, and I think it's going to infect everything we write about.
Okay. Sophie, let's view this from the patient perspective. What changes most when people start turning to AI-generated answers for health advice?
I think the biggest issue at the moment is that it's the accuracy issue. So for the Get Lippy campaign that the Eva Peel run every May, they've just launched recently, they tested 25 scenarios on ChatGPT with gynecological cancer symptoms.
Right.
And actually it gave really incorrect advice. And what was worrying about it, it gave too reassuring advice, overly reassuring advice that would prevent women going to their doctors to seek medical attention. Often those symptoms are really embarrassing. So people are more likely to go online and check first. And also it's difficult to access healthcare at the moment. But if people are then reassured falsely, we may miss gynecological cancers, people will miss out on treatment. The other issue for patients is that we know that these are really accessible. We know most patients look at a smartphone screen when they're searching for health information. They're not sitting at a desk. They fill the whole smartphone screen, and there's some data from the Pew Centre that shows only 1 in 10 people click beyond an AI overview. So what we're also seeing is this disconnect between patients and the patient support groups that can provide them with not only trustworthy health information, but the support and advice they might need. Of our membership, about 6 in 10 have seen a significant drop in traffic, both to their websites and to their helplines, which is really concerning.
That is really concerning. What is the main problem with that huge drop-off?
It's that lack of access to that ongoing support. Because people will look at a website and then they will pick up the support line and they'll get the advice they need. So it's that disconnect between information and support and actual onward signposting to the right services.
Okay, interesting. Steve, turning to you, I just wanted to ask, your fact-checking charity, tell us as an expert, what happens when misinformation, health information, is published online, but then it gets picked up and it gets summarised and it gets into the system, it gets repackaged by AI? What problems does that cause?
Yeah, I mean, big problems, I guess, would be the short answer. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time. I think we need to be careful throughout to balance the positives and the negatives. But certainly what we can see is that any kind of misinformation can be sort of recycled and amplified by AI tools, LLMs in particular. And I think the way that works, a couple of different ways that works. Firstly, it will often strip the context out of it. So if you're searching for something online and you see something in a Reddit thread or on a slightly suspect-looking Facebook post, you know it's a Reddit thread, you know it's a slightly suspect Facebook post. There are the clues there. If it's reproduced in an LLM and it doesn't have the sourcing, or it's not clear, then that's a problem. I think we also see that LLMs can be used to kind of gain legitimacy for dodgy claims. So something we see a lot with health, but with other claims as well, is people sharing screen grabs of Grok, screen grabs of what Google AI overviews have said, and they say, well, look, Google has said it, Grok have said it, so it must be true.
Right.
And the final thing I'd say is something we've started doing for health, but other claims as well, is before we publish a fact check, we will routinely, just before we hit publish, we will check all of the major LLMs and we'll say, well, what are they saying? Sometimes they get it wrong, sometimes they get it right. What we have seen anecdotally, which is encouraging, and we need to get the data on this, is that we check, if it gets it wrong, we check back a day later, a week later rather. And often we see that it's now giving the right answer, and it's doing that because it sees us as a credible source and we've directly addressed the thing. So I think there is hope there.
Are you chipping away at an iceberg, though, there?
It's a very big iceberg, and we've got a very small chisel. So
that's the thing. Once the wrong information gets into the system, it's like a cancer, which must be hard to get out. How do you root out seriously wrong information that has got into so many different sources? How do you do that?
So, I mean, what we try and do, we publish fact checks, but we also intervene. So we will go to the sources themselves and ask them to correct it. And so what we try and do, I guess, is unpick the persistent claims.
Got examples of you doing that and it happening? Have you got any?
Yeah, so there's one which, this is actually not so much a clinical claim, but we found there was a misleading claim about the gender health gap, which was circulating this time last year. And it was really interesting because it had been sort of produced by a wellness company, and then the Lancet had run it, the BMJ, all these really credible sources. And because of that, the LLMs, unsurprisingly, were saying, well, this is legit. So what we did is we fact-checked it, but we also went to each of the sources and pointed out the problem, and gradually they sort of...
Gradually, it's a laborious process you're going through, isn't it?
It takes time, yeah.
Thank God you're there to do it, though. Yeah?
Yes, it's a big job,
It's a huge job. Now, I want to turn to you, Chloe, because I know our company, FleishmanHillard, did a lot of research into how AI is changing healthcare information. Can you just give us some details, the interesting stuff about what that research found?
Yes, so we did a deep dive on how healthcare professionals are using digital channels, including AI recently. And kind of 3 key things came out, which the first one, Steve has echoed, the misinformation crisis that's facing patients is really real, and the flow-on impact is on healthcare professionals and the time that they have. We know when people go into the appointments that are super hard to get, they don't have a lot of time. People go in with a really clear idea of the wrong thing, so they have to spend a lot of time kind of verifying and unpicking that, as you said, and really clarifying, and then that takes away from their really precious treatment time. So it's the link between, the patients going in being misinformed and then the verification on the healthcare professional side. And then we're also seeing, which I'll bring up now because it comes up later in our discussion as well, healthcare professionals are moving away from the more mainstream social platforms, and they're spending a lot more time in those kind of more governed healthcare professional communities. And that's where they're going to. So kind of the flow and effect of the AI means that they're spending more time in the spaces where they're getting verified information. Of course, there's NHS and the NICE website, but there's things like UpToDate, Medscape, and some really cliche clinical networks, and they're influencing the LLM. So it's kind of that process of the healthcare professionals, and we're really seeing what they're doing to try and counteract the misinformation, knowing they don't have much time and they need to get up-to-date info.
Okay. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, and I think, when we've spoken to sort of Google and other companies, they are encouraging people to report inaccuracies, but that is putting the burden on a charitable sector to correct false information that's circulating online, and it's a very slow and gradual process, and it's only if you really put some pressure on that stuff changes. But
have you been putting pressure on Google?
We have tried to. We had 70 organisations ask them to improve the quality of their AI overviews and improve localisation, particularly because of the issues with the US content coming through. It's not appropriate in our system, to kind of reduce the hallucinations and to actually look at a model for verifying UK health content, because we have a trust mark, which is very kind of robust standard for health information called the PIF tick, but it kind of fell on deaf ears. It's only when
just explain that a bit more. The PIF tick. Tell us more about that.
That is a quality mark for health information. There are 10 criteria which make sure that health information meets people's needs, that it's accurate, that it's up to date, and it's accessible. And there are 160 organisations certified, including a lot of pharmaceutical companies and most of the national health charities. So it's growing. It's been going for 5 years.
Do you think that PIF tick is now more important than ever before? Or is it getting...
Absolutely, And people want that. We've had data from Ipsos that people want verification of health information, because while people see that AI is more accessible, they don't feel that they can trust it. And actually the data we've got from Ipsos is that since the sort of AI tools have launched, the number of people who feel that they've been exposed to misinformation has quadrupled.
Okay.
So it's quite significant.
All right, interesting. Let's turn a little bit away from the bashing of AI and maybe looking at some of the benefits as well, because it is a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
And so, Tom, turning to you, there's a study, which I think you may have reported on, suggesting ChatGPT can sometimes answer patient questions more accurately and empathetically, crucially, than GPs can. What does that tell us about the promise of...
Look, I mean, the studies vary, and we're at an early stage on these things, but it was a fascinating study. They went to Reddit for health questions. So the scientists behind this, they sort of trawled Reddit for health questions people had put on Reddit.
Yeah.
And then they gave these either to GPs or to ChatGPT. Then they got a panel of health professionals to look at the answers and judge which was, that they didn't know whether it was like a Turing test of health things. And they judged, not only that the LLMs outperformed, but they were also more sympathetic to the patients, because their time to actually write these lengthy 1,000-word things that the patients wanted, whereas GPs don't. Now, of course, this doesn't look at, these people coming with bumps and scrapes or flu, or, do I need antibiotics? It wasn't looking at necessarily, I have this obscure brain tumour and the accrued experience of a GP who would just know, look, this needs to be looked into, wasn't part of it. But it's fascinating. And I think one thing we should say is that this isn't really a new problem. And what these are replacing isn't patients going to the BMJ for a meta-analysis of the latest research. People were previously Googling stuff. And one of the things that I find hopeful is that if we come to do AI, then you're not going to be able to go down the personal rabbit hole that people went through before. One of the most sort of satisfying things that you can see on Twitter is where people will, in just any random argument, they'll ask Grok to adjudicate. Now, there are a heck of a lot of problems with Grok, but mad people view Grok as their friend because it's like Elon Musk's AI. And you'll see, like, I can't remember who, that sort of footballer who went insane, who had some argument with Grok about contrails, the thing where they're chemtrails, where they're spraying you with chemicals. And he couldn't believe that Grok wasn't backing him up in this argument. He was like, no, you're wrong. So that, in a sense, is previously there were people, and we saw it in COVID, who existed in their own health ecosystems.
Yeah.
And at least you can't do that with the AI.
Right, okay. Just wondering, in terms of AI and summaries, is it in some ways, on the positive side, taking pressure off the healthcare system, that people can get that information without having to go to a GP, without having to go to A&E? Is there positives in that, or...?
I think there could be if the results were accurate enough. And I think the other thing we see is the prompts and the way you ask the question will give you a very different answer.
Yeah.
So there was a study came out recently, and I think it said, if you've got a persistent headache, and if you put in severe or sudden, it was like go to bed with a aspirin or go to A&E. Just minor changes in wording. So I think that can cause a real problem actually for the NHS. We've got loads of people turning up without, with symptoms that really shouldn't be in A&E. So I think there's some education work as well to help people write the correct prompts, understand how to use these tools in a really positive way.
That's it. And also, is there a danger in the fact that AI is actually sounding very fluent, very calm, confident, well-structured answers, even when they're wrong or incomplete?
Well,
and that gives people that
it's that friendliness thing that you've just talked about. So certainly in the mental health space, we've seen, we know Mind has just launched a year-long inquiry into this, because if you Google, if you put into one of these models, I'm being followed, or a bit paranoid about something, it's probably just going to agree with you and tell you to do certain actions, and not actually think that it might be feeding your paranoia even further. And because they're designed to please you, and they'll take you down that rabbit hole, which can be really concerning. And that's certainly among the concerns that some of our mental health charities have at the moment.
It's interesting. A recent report showed that actually 3 out of 10 GPs are actually using AI tools in consultations. They're using them. So it's happening, it's going quickly, but it's how you create those standards and regulations to keep a check on that. isn't it, that is a concern?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the MRHA ran a consultation on this earlier in the year, and they were asking questions like, if a GP is using an AI tool and the AI tool gives the wrong advice, the GP repeats it, who's responsible? The GP, surely, because it's up to them. That's what they're qualified to do. The same way the other way around. But I mean, if the tools are accurate, you can't. I mean, medicine and health is, the kind of conditions we have. You cannot expect a GP to know everything. It's impossible.
Okay.
So it could be helpful, but it needs to have the quality behind it.
Okay. Lots of food for thought here. I'm going to be turning to you in a couple of minutes for your questions, and you guys online. Is there an okay? But before I do. Back to you, Steve, because I wanted to just pick up on where you think humans still have to be in the loop when AI is being used to produce and summarise and distribute health information. Where do humans matter?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think we find, we're starting to use AI ourselves more in our kind of research and editorial processes, and constantly challenging ourselves as to when do you need humans to verify what you're doing.
Yeah.
I would broadly say maybe there's three kind of areas to look at. I think firstly there's the design of the tools themselves. So yes, they're machines doing what machines do, but they're designed by humans, and it's, they're setting the guardrails in terms of sources, in terms of how they handle uncertainty and the degree of sort of certainty, in terms of the other kind of safeguards. So there are decisions being made there, and it's really important that humans are making the right decisions. Then I think there's the case of where it's kind of high risk interactions. So if people are asking about medication or diagnoses, or they've got an urgent medical query, then again you need human review of what they're being told, and probably escalated to healthcare professionals or whatever it could be.
Right.
And the third thing we would like to see, I guess, is when things go wrong, have humans in the feedback loop, because you don't want AI marking its own homework, sort of making decisions on that. You need humans. If someone's saying the AI is getting it wrong, you need humans to be reviewing that.
And your organisation is doing a fantastic job, but it is just one small organisation. Does a lot more need to be done in terms of bringing humans into the equation?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this, I think, is something that has to be led to some extent by the internet platforms. So, yes, we write fact checks and we speak to people, but actually we also try and work with the internet platforms and inform their decisions, because I think that's where the real gains are.
Tell us about how you work with the internet platforms. Again, have you had discussions with Google and others, and can you divulge how those have gone, encouraging in any way?
Yeah, so I think we've had a slightly kind of different experience. So we previously used to be funded to some extent by Google, and we still do some work with Meta in terms of rating misleading posts on their platforms. I think we've had less engagement probably over the last couple of years as internet platforms have sort of changed their approach. And what we found really helpful is where we have those kind of direct lines of communication. So if we spot an issue, yes, we can publish a fact check and go to the press office, but if we have someone in our organisation who can pick up the phone to someone in their organisation at a sort of engineer level and identify what's going wrong, that's where we see there's kind of real benefits.
Okay. And what do you think about in terms of accountability, where information is picked up and it's damaging, it impacts people negatively? Who is responsible? Where does the finger of blame go, or is it too dispersed to actually...
So, I mean, I would say a couple of things. I think, firstly, we all have some kind of responsibility to be getting things right. We're operating in a new environment. We spend a lot of our time not only fact-checking misinformation, but wrong information from credible organisations. So, Department of Health, for instance, earlier this year made a claim that sunbeds are as dangerous as smoking. They've since kind of said that's not right, and I won't go into all the details of that. But what was interesting was we saw Grok repeating that as verbatim, and you could argue Grok's not doing anything wrong there. It's citing a credible source accurately.
How did that misinformation get into the system? Do you
So
know?
it was, I think it was speculating, it was some kind of misunderstanding from whoever was drafting it for the Department of Health, but the fact that it was out there meant that it was then amplified. So I think we all have kind of responsibility, but that said, ultimately, it's the platforms who are providing the safeguards, it's the platforms who are providing the information, it's the platforms who are profiting from this as well. So, if you're choosing primary responsibility, you have to look at them, I think.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, lots to chew over here. Any thoughts from the audience? Any questions? Question at the back. Guy, would you like to take the mic over? Just let us know your name and where you're from.
Thank you. Mark Davis from Shape Health. You've touched on it a little bit, regulation. Medicines can't be made available unless they're proven to be safe and effective and they're approved by the regulator. Doctors are regulated. Shouldn't we be regulating the LLMs as well? Shouldn't they have to prove that they're safe and effective before they can be offered to patients?
That's a good point. Yeah, Sophie, you're nodding away furiously.
In our response to the MRHA's consultation on this earlier in the year, we did say that if they're providing health advice, they should be regulated as medical devices, particularly when you start adding in your own data as well and the information becomes personalised. I don't think they can just be claiming to be surfacing search results. They are producing content and they should be regulated as devices.
Yeah. Tom, would you agree with that or take a different view?
Well, I mean, I think it's not going to happen with the main LLMs. I think if someone like Microsoft is putting something out as a specific healthcare product, then they're implicitly taking responsibility for that. And now whether that ends up getting regulated or not, it'll be hugely embarrassing for them the first time they tell someone with a brain tumour to take an aspirin, and I wonder whether they will. Ideally it would be, but this is all moving so fast. There is so much money involved, and everyone is just shit scared of not being on the AI train, even if it's taking us to the literal extinction of humanity.
The literal extinction of humanity. This is getting serious, people.
I mean, that's the people making these products. We don't talk about this enough. This is totally off topic. The people making these products believe there is a significant percentage chance that they might kill everything that's alive in the world. That's their dystopia. Their utopia is they will make all humans obsolete and destroy all dignity and honour in being a human being. This is irrelevant in the context of that. But let's get back onto health data.
Yeah, sorry. Existential angst here. Okay. More questions. Over there. Again, if you just say who you are, where you're from.
Hello, Henry Arnold from GSK. Maybe on a slightly lighter note, how much of this is a pre-existing issue with search engine optimization rather than GEO? And a couple of the examples were a bit more about kind of answer engine optimization in terms of the AI summaries already provided by the first instance going through a search engine.
Right. Okay, interesting one. Chloe, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I guess, absolutely if there's misinformation out there, it just kind of amplifies what's already there, right? But I guess work that we're doing or where we're kind of pushing projects that we're working on is about thinking about, and whether it's existential and dystopian or not, there are things that can be done to influence the LLMs. Yeah. So, focusing on platforms like YouTube, they're pulling from YouTube a lot, focusing on platforms like, Medscape, also even LinkedIn articles, who would have thought they're influencing the LLMs. So I think, yes, it does amplify what was already out there pre-AI being in the mainstream, but don't lose hope. There is things you can still do, especially working for a healthcare organization, and there's things that you can do to try your best to influence it along the way with credible, verified, fact-checked information.
Yeah, that's interesting. I said at the beginning you work with a lot of big healthcare companies. Can you give us any more detail how you're working with them in this new world of AI and healthcare? How you get to navigate to get their messages out, which might be much harder now?
Definitely. I think, things that have stayed the same, whether we were creating more kind of structured and tailored information, in a kind of early social media days, that stayed the same. And making sure that we've got credible experts, whether we're working with our clients and we've got KOLs, for example, that has definitely stayed the same, but it's more about the platforms that we're using to influence the LLMs would be the big change, and such as I said, putting a lot more time into YouTube now because we know that pulls through. So I think they're the kind of things that we can do in our power to influence it.
Right, interesting. More questions here, Angus.
Thanks, Guy. Angus Phillipson, also from the Pharma Letter. I'm actually a technologist, so I come from a software company that owns the Pharma Letter, and we have an interest in managing content and content production. Chloe, you mentioned healthcare professionals are moving towards governed spaces like Medscape and places where they trust sources. Sophie and PIF, you said you're lobbying technology companies and Google to ensure health information does meet people's needs. And it was interesting to hear, is it Henry from Glaxo, talking about search engine optimization and generative answer engine optimization. My question is this, what are the pharmaceutical companies and the healthcare organizations actually doing to structure content and data to ensure that it's being consumed in the correct way to optimize that? Because there is a responsibility on them to make sure that citations are correct. And are they lobbying the technology companies to ensure that that is the case and that correct citations are made? And you can see that from different models. So the kind of profile of different models that people use. Perplexity, for example, is known for its fact-checking and its closeness to the truth and the fact that it doesn't hallucinate. So they have obviously recognised that has market potential if people trust them more because the citations are correct. So what are the pharma companies doing? What are the healthcare organisations doing to mitigate that risk?
Chloe?
Yeah, I think building on exactly what you said, it's about, how you're structuring the information. We have like a bit of a checklist that we use when we're creating content now to make sure that we cover off all of those things. And I guess on behalf of our clients, many of who are large global pharmaceutical companies, it's making sure that we are exactly as you said, that there's clear attribution, that the credentials are really clear. That's always been important, that any conflicts of interest as well are disclosed in the content that we're writing or wherever that content is going online, that we're linking to primary sources, knowing that they will be rewarded by the LLMs if it is the primary sources that we're sharing the information from. And also just the human side, as we've touched on today as well, making sure that there's signals in the content that human experts have fed into that. So I think, the lobbying obviously is happening, but I think what we're trying to do is lead by example, really.
Okay.
We've done something very similar for our cross-sector membership. We put out some guidance last September on exactly that, about how to structure content. And, all the things that you've just talked about are all embedded in our criteria, all those credibility marks. So people are getting those credibility signals into their content. But also things like Q&As, FAQs perform really well on these because all the things that make it easy for humans to read content, it's the same with bots. They can digest it much faster if it's got a lower reading age and it's clearly structured content. But the other thing we've told people to do is really own their space and be really clear about the content that they are producing, that it's not duplicating content elsewhere, because otherwise you're just not going to get picked up so much in the summaries and then signposted on.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that people can do to get in there, but I think also what we see is that traditional kind of search is dead now. So you are having to do that generative optimization, but it's about visibility now. So it's not just it's about being on social media, being on YouTube, being on podcasts, being everywhere, so that you get more chance.
And what do you tell your organisations that are part of your organisation about their websites that no one's coming to anymore? What are they
They're doing exactly these things now to kind of own their space, really. And some of them are making changes to their content so that they will pull through. But I think the other things we're really working on is improving signposting from healthcare professionals to patient organisations, because as you rightly said, healthcare professionals are seeing misinformation coming into the surgery or going into the consultant's room, and it is wasting a lot of time. It's really difficult to have those conversations if somebody is really convinced about a piece of misinformation that they've heard. So actually that kind of benefits everybody if we, as well as doing the other stuff, we're doing some kind of signposting. So we've been working with NHS England around that sort of stuff too. Okay,
excellent. More questions?
Simon Perry from the Institute for Physical Studies. An anecdote is I went to a GP and with much certainty I said I might need antibiotics for a chest problem. And they said, well, I don't think you need antibiotics, but you said you wanted antibiotics, so I'm going to prescribe them to you. I was kind of taken aback by that, but it made me think about the pressure that GPs are we're already under with Google search in terms of patients going in with a very clear idea of what they think is wrong with them, but with much more tailored, personalised information. Are we going to see just an erosion of the kind of authority of GPs and doctors? And if that's the case, what are the implications of that? Where does that lead to?
Erosion of the authority of doctors. Tom, do you think that's coming as we look at the end times?
Yeah, I mean, possibly it speaks with the AI speaks with great authority, and it gives you one singular source. Whereas before, when people were googling things, they, would Google from several different places, and you could believe that the particular source you had was wrong from your sort of friend on Facebook. But it's a lot harder to believe that the AI is wrong. But yeah, everything's changing so much, so God knows.
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if we stop having this paternalistic kind of doctor-patient relationship anyway, because the way that medicine is going, we're supposed to be talking about shared decision-making, we're supposed to be talking about patient involvement, and that's so much the better. I'm not a fan of that real paternalistic doctor, tells you to do this, do that. You should have agency as an individual when you're going into that room.
Okay, sure. Excellent. More questions? Down here in the middle, guy.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm from Lexington. I work in health communications. So my question is about health literacy and specifically AI literacy. Because everyone's very used to talking about the importance of health literacy and how patients need to be kind of empowered to do shared decision making, essentially. But now that patients are using LLMs and AI more, I think this now becomes a big part of health literacy, kind of equipping patients with the knowledge to be able to use these tools effectively. So I guess my question is, what does good education look like to kind of empower patients with this AI literacy, and who should be responsible for delivering it?
Okay. Steve, do you want to pick up on this? Good question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think AI literacy, media literacy generally, is very much kind of front of mind for us when we're thinking about this problem. We see it in terms of the kind of responses we see. So when we're fact-checking something, we're always looking at the comments below to see if people actually believe this or whatever, and it's very apparent. You would be surprised what people will believe online. It does happen. So I think we think AI literacy, media literacy is really important. I think there are ways you can do that in terms of embedding it more within the curriculum at an early stage, potentially getting platforms to take more responsibility for training people how to use these incredibly powerful tools. But I guess the one sort of counter-argument I'd offer as well is I think when we're thinking about where the responsibility lies, while we want greater AI literacy, I think we need to cut the patient some slack, essentially, because if people are looking for healthcare information and they maybe in distress, they clearly don't know the answer, that's why they're searching in the first case, it's probably, in my opinion at least, unfair to expect them to kind of beat the AI tool in terms of checking sources and looking for nuance which the AI tool has missed. So I think we absolutely need the understanding, but also the responsibility probably sits elsewhere.
Okay.
I think we're also all going to get better at this. If we saw recently the sort of grimly hilarious thing that Reform's failed candidate who wrote that book, Matt, who got known as Matt GPT, because it turned out his book about the sort of how Britain was going to hell in a handcart. He had it turns out that there were a whole bunch of quotes in it from really significant figures like Churchill and Shakespeare and stuff that it had just made up. And I found, it wasn't that he'd sort of sourced these badly, because, there's so many you can quote. Thomas Edison is everywhere on the internet saying things that Thomas Edison didn't say. Is that these form of words did not exist in the entire corpus of humanity. They could not be found, these words that he had attributed. And I know exactly how this happened, because I'm currently trying to write a book. And I am, you go into it, and I've got an idea of what I want. It's a historical book about the 50s. It doesn't matter about the topic, but I've got a half idea that someone said something, and I'll say it, and it will give me the perfect quote for the situation I need. And I will chase this quote down, and I will say to it, I can't find that. And it say, you can't find it because it's in this book. It will give me a book that is really, really, this is the book it should be in. this is the book, that if this quote exists, it'll be in this book. I will find the book on the Internet Archive. I'll say, what page? Because I won't find it. I think, maybe the OCR's gone wrong. And I'll say, go to the page it tells me to. And it won't be on that page. And I'll go back to it and say, it's not on that page. And then I'll say, yeah. Not me. And this will happen more and more, and people will realise the limitations, I think, and probably they will realise, actually, I need to click through to the NHS site that it's mentioned, or the BHS site.
That's it. That's exactly right. That's what you were saying, Chloe, about that verification, taxing time on the healthcare professional. Say, is that actually true? I'm going to waste all this time discovering it isn't. Question over there. We'll just wait for the microphone to come to you.
Keeping you on your toes now.
Hi, Victoria Bates, Patient Public Involvement Lead, and my apologies because I've got a dash in a minute, but the conversation is just so inspirational. But my biggest concern from what you've just said, Tom, as well, is how do we make sure boats all rise on the same tide? My biggest concern is inequity. Yes, hopefully we all become informed and we're all equipped, but this could cause a huge divergence and we leave so many of the population behind and ill-equipped and ill-informed, and that they don't attend and they miss and they become sicker as a result of the influence of what we're seeing. And how can we actually tackle that? Because that's a big concern.
Big concern.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing from our membership is that is their biggest concern about people who've already got lower health literacy are much more vulnerable to this. We've got very low adult skills in this country. 1 in 5 people have got very low, very, very low levels of literacy, numeracy, and adaptive problem solving. So to your point, we need to get some really simple messages out about how to use these tools, because these tools are much more accessible than a lot of, the answers they provide are really accessible, and so they're easy answers, much easier to understand than going to some scientific paper and trying to work out the data yourself. And I think if you have got a new diagnosis, it's a really difficult time. You can't even interpret information sometimes. So we really need to get the messaging right, and doing through the education system is going to take too long. So we do need to have some public education campaigns, even just in the UK, just by saying search UK sources when you're asking your question will make a big difference. So we are planning some work on that over the summer.
You are planning some, yeah. Oh, that's an interesting positive move. Any other thoughts, questions, stories? Sorry. Go for it. Hold on. Sorry, forgive me. I said go for it and then said hold on for the mic.
Thank you. So sorry, just to your point, Sophie, there, that is specifically from a patient perspective and healthcare. Are there any other industries that we could link up with, that we could work with to do that educational piece, so that it doesn't sit necessarily on you, who are a relatively small organisation, in the big picture of pharma?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this a lot across the charitable sector. So housing advice, for example, Shelter and some of the other housing charities have seen it really incorrect housing advice because it's been bought from US sources. And it's nothing to do with our legal system. So but it does seem to be the charitable sector that is most concerned. However, for the pharmaceutical industry, I think this is a huge concern as well, because we're seeing so much medicines misinformation that is circulating. I mean, even just, it's kind of laughable, but all the stuff about paracetamol and autism earlier in the year, but it's across every area of medicine, and we see it all the time. So because the algorithms have added this experiential content in, this is pulling much more from Reddit and other sources. Yeah. So, I do think it's something we need to work on collectively in health and in other sectors to make some improvements.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? One more, and then we're going to come to the final bit and look for final fixes.
Hi guys, my name's Lottie from Amgen UK. So I wanted to bring it a bit more back to the positive. So I had a GP appointment recently, and they used, it wasn't ChatGPT specifically, but they used Google, brought up a ChatGPT or Google version of what I was getting diagnosed with, and it was really quick for the GP to be like, this is a little bit more about what you have, explained in a really clear way, here are the pictures, it will come up. And I thought that really saved time in my appointment. So I guess my question is, how do you think the LLMs will help, say, like NHS England, with the GP-patient relationship, but also broader like healthcare system relationship with the patients in the system.
Who wants to pick up on that?
Well, I
Sophie.
think, you know, I think there are real positives about this. You know, I was saying earlier, it's impossible for GPs to know absolutely everything now. And we hear all the time in rare disease, it's taken so long to get a diagnosis. But it's just about making sure that the tools that the GPs have access to are really accurate. And if you can then send that summary to that person from an accurate source, so much the better. Hopefully with links to sort of ongoing information and support if it's a long-term condition, so that people can get that longer-term support that they need along that healthcare journey. So there is a potential, and we've been testing a model ourselves with some of our PIVTIC certified content with a sort of an agent, which is answering questions in a sort of verbal form, and it's having interesting results. But we have got to stop it degrading when it gets to the point, as you said, that this point of they will hallucinate when they get to the end of their knowledge base, and that's the issue we're having, that the answers are degrading, and that we need to also have red flags where it will send somebody to a helpline and a human being to give them the support they need.
This is great. Listen, as we're coming to the end of our time together, there's lots of practical things you're suggesting there, Sophie, to try and stop truth being distorted by AI or being uncovered if it isn't true. Are there any other practical things you others can suggest that we need to focus on in order to fight this tide of potential misinformation? Practical things we can do?
I don't know if this is a practical thing. I do think it's worth rooting in. My suspicion is, in most circumstances, if you compare this to the same person trying to get it through Google, you're probably going to end up with a better service. Or it's less likely to be catastrophic. The current system we have was never brilliant. There are a new set of problems with this, but these are copable with, and I don't think. I think we should remember that what it's replacing is deeply imperfect. The other thing I'd say is I do anticipate a future where we have this integrated, being used by GPs and providing something that's far better than the sum of its parts.
Okay, interesting. So to end, no pressure, folks, but I just wanted you all in one sentence, or maybe I'll give you a couple. What is the one principle that should be guiding us as we attempt to protect truth in this AI-generated healthcare world? I'll start with you, Stephen. We'll come down the line here.
Put me on the spot. I think it's kind of obvious, but I think probably the crucial thing is that the information that the AI summaries and LLMs provide is kind of good enough. And I think there's an acceptance that good enough works in lots of ways. People are happy with 95% right if you're looking for gardening tips or you're checking train times or whatever it may be, but it's good enough is not good enough for healthcare because of the risk of harm. So I need to kind of get that message across, I think.
Okay. Chloe.
I guess my kind of key takeout is really to focus on the things that you can really influence and control. So, if you're putting content out there, are you sourcing it? Is it credible? Are you showing the human touch? And just really make sure that you're going through that process, as we've discussed, to do your best to be contributing to the LLMs being accurate.
Okay. Tom, final
I guess it's about responsibility and liability. And I think we should always ask ourselves, if this is wrong, who is liable? And if it's no one, then that's a problem. And then if it's no one, then it's me. And I think we should remember that that's the case.
Okay, interesting. Great stuff. And final word to you, Sophie.
Well, I'd echo everything that everybody else has said, but I do think we need some public education and fast, so that people are aware of the limitations of the tools. I mean, even Google CEO has said you should look beyond the overviews and not trust them. So, we need to get that message around more clearly and get people to look at the overview, but then go on to other sources.
Great stuff. What a wonderful discussion. Really interesting. Let's show our appreciation for the panellists. Thank you. Brilliant. And as you can see, there's a massive feast of food over there, which is there to be eaten. Panelists will stay with us for a while if you want to come and have one-on-one conversations with them. But thank you very much for coming. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
Great.